Imagine for a moment, the world you see around you isn't fixed, final, or absolute. It's fluid, malleable, unfolding in exact response to what you've held, consistently and often unconsciously, in your field of thought. As Charles F. Haanel once taught, the world without is a reflection of the world within. Thought is not passive. It is not commentary. Thought is causation. The very first act of creation, before form, before function, before visibility, begins in mind. So before we journey inward, I invite you to like and subscribe, but only if it truly resonates with your soul. You're not at the mercy of conditions. You are the origin point of what conditions become. Everything that moves through your experience, patterns, relationships, opportunities, limitations, has a mental equivalent that preceded it. You're not being tested by life. You're being mirrored by it. This is the law of mental causation, the principle that mind is the only true first cause, not fate, not chance, not luck or karma as we've misunderstood it. Thought, repeated and emotionally impressed, creates form, not sometimes, always. The power in this is staggering and also deeply sobering, because it means every moment you entertain a thought, you begin to animate a pattern. Not all thoughts carry weight, but sustained emotionally charged thought builds the architecture of your next reality. This isn't just theory, it's function. The Christ said, "It is done unto you as you believe." Haanel simply translated that into metaphysical mechanics. What you believe, you build. So where is your mind anchored? Drifting in contradiction or grounded in clarity? Chasing solutions externally or realizing the source has always been within? The creative mind, the higher aspect of your consciousness, doesn't judge, doesn't delay, doesn't discriminate. It takes direction. And the only direction it responds to is dominant mental focus. What you hold longest and strongest becomes causative. This is why fleeting affirmations without depth rarely change lives. Because it's not about repetition, it's about saturation. The idea must saturate your being, becoming not just something you think, but something you live from. Then, the law begins to shape form around that internal climate. Your thoughts are not isolated. They condition the vibrational field around you. They mold the formless substance of reality like a sculptor's hands in clay. But unlike clay, which can be shaped once and forgotten, your reality is ever malleable, because thought never stops flowing. This should give you a holy kind of reverence for what you entertain. Every mental image, every emotional narrative, every assumption is a brushstroke on the canvas of your life. And the longer you dwell on an image, the more real it becomes, not just internally, but outwardly. You're not punished for thinking negatively. You're simply experiencing the result of a thought system that was never yours to begin with. And the moment you choose to step back, observe, and redirect thought, you reclaim the seat of authorship. This isn't about policing every thought. That leads to suppression. It's about becoming aware of what you're giving mental authority to. Most of what you experience isn't happening to you. It's happening through you, in alignment with what you've accepted as possible, probable, and permissible. So today begins the shift. You no longer look to the world to determine what is real. You look to your own consciousness and ask, what am I forming with this thought? What world am I building through my focus? This doesn't require drama. It requires deliberate clarity. Just as a builder consults a blueprint before laying foundation, you consult the creative mind to ensure what you're building is worth inhabiting. And if it isn't, you change the thought. Not once, but consistently. Until the new image stabilizes. This is how transformation becomes tangible, and it starts with a decision to honor your thought life as sacred causation. So pause now. Anchor in this simple truth. Mind is the master key. Thought is the starting point of form. I think with clarity, and creation follows. This is the path. not because someone said so, but because this is how the thought that forms worlds begins, in silence, in consciousness, in you. You think the universe complies, not eventually, not occasionally, immediately. The delay you perceive between thought and manifestation isn't a question of whether the law works. It's a question of how precisely your thought is received. The universe doesn't respond to wishful thinking. It responds to clarity, to belief, to emotional commitment. You don't instruct reality with scattered energy. You do it with focused conviction, held consistently. This is the essence of Haanel's principle of resonance. You impress your thought upon creative mind, and the universe arranges itself around the frequency you maintain. Not the words you say, but the energy you carry. Think of your consciousness as a transmitter. Every belief you hold is a frequency, every idea you rehearse is a signal. The universe doesn't need a dramatic ritual to understand you. It needs consistency of signal. That's how creation moves. When you accept a thing as real, internally, emotionally, and without contradiction, creative mind sets the wheels of causation in motion. This isn't emotional optimism. It's mental law in operation. The outer world does not dictate your next step. Your inner authority does. But that authority must be activated deliberately. You can't send mixed signals and expect consistent results. You can't say, "I am abundant," while living from mental patterns of limitation. Thought and vibration must agree. When they do, results unfold in remarkable ways, often with speed that seems miraculous. Yet nothing here is mystical. It's precise. You think clearly. You believe deeply. You hold the pattern consistently, and the universe complies, not because it favors you, but because it mirrors you. That's what law means. It does not discriminate. It responds. So what are you thinking? Not just consciously, but habitually? Because what you think in passing does not impress creative mind. What you think in patterns does. The repeated storyline, the inner monologue, the image you replay when no one's watching. That's what shapes your life. And this is where your true work begins, not with chasing change in the world, but with refining the thought system from which your world emerges. This is not about becoming hyper-controlling of your mind. It's about cultivating mental congruence. Your thoughts must align with what you claim to believe. Otherwise, you'll generate inner friction, and that friction weakens your signal. The Christ pattern within you, your divine potential, does not hesitate. It thinks clearly, acts decisively, and trusts fully. When you operate from that pattern, you begin to embody a different kind of authority, quiet, grounded, certain, the kind that bends time, opens paths, and silences confusion. Not because you forced anything, but because your signal became undeniably coherent. So let's bring this into form. What do you want to create, not just in result, but in rhythm? A life of peace? Then think peace, not only in calm moments, but in conflict. A life of prosperity? Then think abundance, not only in times of flow, but in moments of choice. A life of purpose? Then think alignment, not only in vision, but in action. The law responds not to peaks, but to patterns, and your thought patterns are yours to choose, refine, and stabilize. You are not a reactor. You are a responsible architect of consciousness. So stand in that role, not anxiously, but with reverence. The world will comply with your deepest assumption. It always has. From this moment, speak internally from clarity, not confusion. My thoughts are not random. They're creative commands. What I believe, I become. What I hold, the law fulfills. Breathe with it. Feel the weight of that knowing. Because now, you're not just learning metaphysics, you're demonstrating it. With every thought you're willing to hold steady in truth. Creative power requires mental precision. You are not creating reality in broad strokes. You are shaping it moment by moment, detail by detail, based on the exact frequency of thought you consistently occupy. The universe is not vague, it is specific, and so must you be. This is the heart of Haanel's law of deliberate thinking. Creation is not powered by scattered desire or emotional bursts. It is powered by sustained, intentional thought directed with clarity and confidence. Precision matters because the law cannot fill in the blanks. It mirrors exactly what you broadcast. Clarity is creative. Ambiguity delays. Until your inner image becomes definite, your outer world remains in flux. This is why general wishing does not yield specific results. If you're unclear about what you want, the law has no instruction to follow. And if you change direction every time resistance shows up, your vibration resets, and the pattern never completes. Mental precision is not intensity, it's stability. A calm, unwavering thought is more powerful than a passionate, fleeting one. You don't need to think harder, you need to think straighter, aligned with the pattern, free from contradiction, anchored in truth. The Christ pattern within doesn't waver between truth and fear. It operates in mental consistency, and the more you match that frequency, the more seamless your life begins to feel. You stop starting over. You stop doubting the process. You build momentum that holds. Think of your mind as a lens. When unfocused, the light disperses, scattered, weak. But when focused with precision, it cuts through resistance like a laser. That's the power of a clear idea held without inner conflict. So ask yourself, what have I been vague about? Where have I hoped without directing? Where have I affirmed without visualizing? Where have I desired but hesitated to define? Creative mind cannot complete what you won't articulate. There's no danger in being specific. Clarity doesn't trap you. It frees you. Because once the image is defined, the law can get to work. This is not about controlling outcomes. It's about choosing starting points with accuracy. You don't need to micromanage every detail, but you do need to become precise about your inner tone, the essence of what you're broadcasting, and the standard you're willing to hold. Mental fog creates spiritual static. Precision clears the channel. This is especially vital when challenges arise. In moments of doubt or disruption, the mind will want to scatter. But those are the exact moments where precision holds the line. You return to the vision. You reaffirm the blueprint. You stay clean in your direction, even when circumstances waver. That steadiness becomes power, and that power becomes proof. People will feel it, not because you're louder, but because your field becomes more coherent. You'll feel it, not as hype, but as deep inner alignment that no longer needs reassurance. And from there, creation speeds up, because the law is no longer correcting course every time you shift. So speak this with clarity, not as hope, but as decision. My thought is focused and intentional. What I define, I direct. Creative power moves through my clarity. Feel the solidity of that statement. It's not motivation, it's a mental anchor. And when you think from that place, the pattern you hold has no choice but to form. The law responds to inner agreement, not outer effort, not appearances, not your best intentions, but the deep, often unspoken assumptions you hold beneath the surface. These assumptions, when left unexamined, become default commands to creative mind. They direct without your consent, until you bring them into awareness and choose otherwise. There's no spiritual shortcut around this. The law of alignment is always in operation. Your reality forms in accordance with your most consistent, energetic agreement. You may speak words of confidence, but if doubt is the dominant signal, the law complies with the doubt. Not out of punishment, but out of precision. Creative mind doesn't respond to what you say you want. It responds to what you accept as real, the vibration you settle into when the affirmations stop and the quiet begins. This is why transformation doesn't begin with declaration. It begins with honest recognition, not self-judgment, not guilt, but a clear inventory of where your thoughts, feelings, and identity are actually landing. Many people ask why the law isn't working when in fact it's working perfectly, delivering results that match their internal state with exactness. The problem is not the principle. The problem is the disagreement between what's being claimed and what's being believed. You might hold a vision in the morning and contradict it emotionally by afternoon, not intentionally, but subtly. An offhand comment, a habitual worry, a mental habit left unchecked. These are the quiet signals that dilute your alignment. But the solution is not to fight them, it's to observe, choose, and redirect. You begin to shift not by resisting the old agreement, but by forming a stronger one, a new assumption that is repeated, not out of desperation, but with grounded certainty. A thought pattern that becomes so familiar, so practiced, that your system starts to live from it even when you're not trying. This is inner agreement, and when it locks in, things change fast. You don't need to beg, push, or chase. Reality simply bends toward the dominant pattern because that's what law must do. You've experienced this before, even without knowing it. Times when something clicked into place, not because circumstances changed, but because you stopped doubting your place in it. You stopped negotiating with the vision, you chose. And that choice made space for form to follow. This can happen more often. It's not random. It's the result of agreement between your conscious mind, your emotional tone, and your embodied identity. You don't need to fix yourself. You need to agree with who you already are in truth. The Christ pattern doesn't need improvement. It needs alignment. It activates fully when your inner world stops arguing with it. So let's get practical. Think less in terms of chasing results and more in terms of living in agreement with what's already true. You don't affirm abundance because you're broke. You affirm it because lack was never your nature to begin with. You don't visualize healing to escape pain. You do it because your essence is already whole and you're returning to that frequency. Agreement is remembrance. It's not something you muscle into place. It's a quiet click in consciousness that says, this is what I'm available for now. No performance, no panic, just internal clarity. So let this become your mental stance. I no longer negotiate with truth. I live in agreement with my divine pattern. The law responds to my clarity. Speak it once, then let your life confirm it. Because the moment agreement becomes consistent, the delay ends, and the law begins shaping a world that reflects your highest signal without hesitation. Belief is the builder of structure. Everything you experience, every rhythm in your relationships, every financial pattern, every emotional baseline rests on a foundation of belief. Not the beliefs you say out loud, but the ones that live quietly under the surface. The ones you no longer question because they've become part of your identity. This is the law of constructive belief. Sustained inner acceptance forms the structure into which your reality must settle. It doesn't matter how much you want something if your beliefs cannot hold the weight of it. Creative mind does not operate by your desires alone. It builds within the shape your belief allows. This is why change must begin inside. Not with affirmations you repeat for a week, not with inspiration that fades after the feeling passes, but with restructuring the very ideas you've accepted as truth about who you are, what you deserve, and how reality works. Belief shapes the boundaries of possibility. If you believe you must earn your worth, every opportunity will carry the weight of proving. If you believe life must be hard, you'll unconsciously filter ease out of your field. If you believe your past defines your potential, your future will remain confined to memory. Not because the law resists your evolution, but because the mental structure hasn't changed, and the law requires a container. This is what Charles F. Haanel pointed to repeatedly. Thought isn't just a spark, it's a constructor of form. Belief takes that thought and turns it into architecture. If the architecture is unstable, manifestation collapses before it takes root. But here's the good news. Structures can be rebuilt. You are not trapped by your history. You are never at the mercy of a belief you're willing to question. The moment you examine the blueprint and choose to redraw it, the law responds with new form. It cannot do otherwise. So what needs to shift? Perhaps it's not that your vision is too big, but that your belief system is too narrow to hold it. Perhaps you're not lacking opportunity, but resisting it unconsciously because it contradicts an outdated self-image. These are not moral failings. They're invitations to upgrade your inner architecture. And that upgrade doesn't happen by force. It happens through repetition, reflection, and consistency of truth. You speak the new belief, not just in moments of inspiration, but when your nervous system wants to retreat. You hold it, not as a desperate hope, but as a decision made in clarity. Over time, that belief settles into your system. It becomes the new baseline, and suddenly, life starts organizing around it, not magically but mechanically. The Christ pattern doesn't wait to be proven. It waits to be agreed with. And belief is how that agreement stabilizes. So begin simply. Choose one thought that matches your highest truth. Hold it, not like a lifeline, but like a foundation. Then let your thoughts, your decisions, and your emotions begin to gather around it. This is how you build from within, not with pressure, but with precision. Say this, not to test it, but to live it. My beliefs form the framework of my life. I release what no longer holds truth. I build with conviction, and the law supports me. This is not a mantra. It's a new instruction to the structure that forms your world. And the moment you believe from clarity, the law has its blueprint, and creation begins. Thoughts condition energy into form. This is the unseen process behind every visible outcome. Thought is not static. It is directive. It moves energy. It arranges vibration. And when it becomes emotionally charged and repeated with inner certainty, it starts gathering substance around it. You're not waiting for reality to happen to you. You're shaping it, moment by moment. With each inner assumption, you let settle into place. Not every thought becomes a thing, but every thought you feel consistently and live from begins the formation of something. Haanel understood this well. He didn't ask us to casually monitor our minds. He called us to train them, to refine our mental habits until they became intentional tools of creation. Because energy is not neutral, it's obedient. It takes its cue from the structure we provide through thought. And the structure begins in silence. It's not about dramatizing your vision or repeating affirmations with a strained smile. It's about the inner posture that grows from repetition with presence. The way a single sentence, fully believed, starts to rewrite the code of your nervous system. The way a mental image, revisited often enough, starts to carry a felt sense of inevitability. This is how creative mind works. It doesn't act on random whims. It builds through patterns, and the patterns come from what you consistently energize. Most people move through life reinforcing old scripts without knowing it. The thoughts they allow while driving, while waiting, while drifting into sleep, those are the ones conditioning the field. Not the bold declarations at the peak of a podcast episode, but the background loops running beneath awareness. That's where the real power lies, in the subconscious agreement. The law doesn't separate conscious thought from unconscious expectation. It responds to whichever one carries more consistency and emotional weight. So the work is to make conscious thinking strong enough that it begins to overwrite the old story. Not with friction, but with rhythm. You don't fight the old belief, you replace it. Not once, but continually. Not urgently, but deliberately. And you begin to notice the shift. Not always in external events first, but in inner stability. The calm that comes when you no longer entertain conflicting signals. The clarity that emerges when you stop giving energy to thought forms that no longer serve. This is not about becoming robotic, it's about becoming clear. Because clarity is creative, it doesn't just guide behavior, it shapes what energy does next. You might not see instant results. The old structure may resist change, but the energy is still moving. Form takes time to reorganize. The deeper the old imprint, the more consistently you must offer the new one, not as a performance, but as a signal of agreement with truth. And truth is not found in intensity, it's found in resonance. When your thought aligns with the Christ pattern, whole, powerful, coherent form begins to take shape more efficiently, less resistance, less delay. Because the field has received a clear command. This is how manifestation becomes natural. Not because you've mastered some cosmic cheat code, but because you've learned how to live in agreement with the energy of what you want. You've stopped thinking about truth and started thinking from it. There is no need to obsess. What's needed is saturation, a steady return to the chosen pattern, even when nothing appears to be changing. That return is what creates the shift. That return is what conditions energy to take form. Eventually, the new thought becomes familiar. Then it becomes dominant. Then it becomes your field. And once it settles there, results become inevitable. You're not trying to attract the outcome. You're preparing a home for it. And energy always moves toward a prepared pattern. This is the quiet authority of deliberate thinking. It doesn't beg. It doesn't prove. It holds. And holding the pattern is enough. Mental causation is always operating. There is no pause, no off switch, no neutral gear. Creative mind doesn't take breaks when you're tired, uncertain, or unaware. The thoughts you carry, even those not spoken, continue to shape the energetic scaffolding of your world. That's the weight and wonder of it. You are always creating. Not occasionally, not only in meditation, not only during visualization or prayer, but always. This is the engine behind the law of perpetual transmutation of energy. Energy is never stagnant. It is constantly taking shape, responding to the most dominant signal it receives. And thought is that signal, your internal directive, that begins the alchemical process of reality making. What you accept repeatedly becomes structure. Most people assume they are reacting to reality, but in truth, they're reacting to a reflection of thoughts they've habitually held. Those thoughts congealed into outcomes, patterns repeated. And now the loop feels familiar, even though it was self-authored. This is not about blame. It's about ownership. When you recognize that causation never ceases, you stop treating your mind as background noise and start using it like the creative tool it is. You begin to understand that every moment of mental drift, every story you replay, every image you revisit is laying bricks in the unseen world. The choice is no longer whether you're creating, it's what you're agreeing to create. You can't pause the process, but you can become conscious within it. And that's where everything changes. You start offering clearer thoughts, more supportive beliefs, and emotionally aligned visions, not because you're desperate for change, but because you finally respect the weight your thoughts carry. There's no need to be perfect. What matters is momentum. The more often you return to truth, especially when it's inconvenient, the more power your chosen signal gains. Energy begins to conform, new ideas stabilize, old conditions loosen, and the field around you starts reorganizing itself without struggle. This is what Haanel emphasized when he said that mind is the ruler of circumstance, not occasionally, but continually. You don't manifest something separate from you. You simply allow your already creative mind to direct energy in a new way. And the key is consistency. Every moment you think in alignment, the field begins listening more attentively. Every time you hold a thought of truth longer than a doubt, you gain ground. Not because of force, but because of coherence, the consistency between thought, feeling, and frequency. This coherence builds momentum. That momentum becomes a current, and that current begins to influence the field of experience, drawing into visibility the exact pattern you've sustained long enough to become reality. If that feels daunting, pause. You're not behind. This isn't about becoming perfectly aware every minute. It's about trusting that your return to alignment is more powerful than any temporary drift. It's about realizing that every conscious choice reclaims authorship. Every clear thought sends out new instruction, and every moment you remember this law, you dissolve the illusion of powerlessness. That illusion was never real. You were never cut off from your creative authority. You may have forgotten it. You may have handed it to fear for a while, but it never left you. Now, You reclaim it, not with noise, but with quiet, consistent alignment. Because you understand that the cause of your life is not out there. It's in the subtle, continuous, unshakable flow of thought that you either let drift or deliberately direct. This is mastery, not stopping causation, but stepping into it fully aware. Clarity activates creative authority. When your thought becomes focused, clean, committed, and free from contradiction, something powerful begins to occur. The law of mind responds with greater precision, greater speed, and fewer delays. Not because it suddenly starts working, but because your signal has stopped changing mid-transmission. Haanel taught this with piercing simplicity. The degree of control you have over your results is directly tied to the clarity of your mental state. The moment your desire becomes definite, when the image is no longer vague and the belief no longer wavers, you shift from hoping into initiating. Clarity doesn't demand drama, it speaks through stability. It's a calm, non-negotiable stance that says, "This is the shape of what I choose to create." And the field listens accordingly. Creative mind doesn't interpret ambiguity. It cannot act on double signals, and it never overrides confusion. When you're unclear, it builds nothing with full force. But when you decide, really decide, not just in moments of emotional high, but with lasting inner resolve, everything starts to accelerate. That decision becomes magnetic. It draws form toward you not by wishful pulling, but by alignment. Energy flows where clarity lives. Think of every invention, every revolution, every personal transformation that ever came into being. None of it began with scattered energy. It began with a clear idea, sustained through contrast, held through resistance, and reinforced through action. Clarity is what allows power to concentrate. It cuts through distraction. It silences hesitation. It sharpens every part of your system, mental, emotional, spiritual, until the signal you emit is too consistent to ignore. And the law, faithful as ever, meets that signal with equal intensity. This doesn't mean you must know every detail. What matters is that you're clear on the essence. You may not know every step, but when your frequency becomes sure, when you stop contradicting your choice with fear, shame, or second-guessing, you activate a new level of creative power. The Christ pattern within you is already clear. It knows what it is here to express. It doesn't debate its own worth. It doesn't alternate between truth and doubt. It moves forward in coherence. And when you come into agreement with that clarity, you begin to operate with ease and velocity. This is why scattered intention leads to stagnation. It's not that you're unworthy or undisciplined. It's that the field doesn't know what to respond to. Too many conflicting ideas means too many incomplete signals. But the moment you pause and gather your energy behind a single choice, a single image, a single identity, you give the law something to respond to. And it does. There's a kind of power that only shows up once you've stopped entertaining other options. Not out of force, but because the vision has become real to you. It's no longer a possibility. It's a decision that's been made within your nervous system, your language, and your behavior. And from that place, the creative process becomes less about effort and more about unfolding. That's the secret to spiritual efficiency. It's not about doing more. It's about doing less with greater intention. Fewer half-starts, fewer back and forths, fewer mental negotiations that dilute the flow of energy. When you're clear, the next step reveals itself. When you're clear, you don't need to chase signs, they appear. When you're clear, your field does the speaking for you. And clarity is always available. It isn't a trait some people are born with. It's a decision you practice again and again until it becomes your new baseline, until your life begins to take on the shape of that certainty. The law doesn't ask for proof. It asks for precision. And when you offer it, creation begins, not one day, but now. Your world mirrors mental consent. Nothing enters your life without passing through the gateway of your consciousness. Not because you're controlling every detail with your intellect, but because every experience reflects what you have permitted silently, repeatedly, and often unconsciously through sustained mental agreement. This is the foundation of Haanel's law of reflection. The outer world is not an independent event. It's a mirror. And like any mirror, it doesn't create. It reflects what's standing before it. This is where the illusion of external control begins to dissolve. You don't shift your world by manipulating outcomes. You shift it by changing what you agree to within. When you no longer consent to struggle, it stops appearing. When you stop validating the old story of delay or scarcity, it loses its magnetic pull. You don't fight it. You simply stop energizing it. The creative mind doesn't recognize effort. It recognizes consistency. It recognizes permission. Most people have unknowingly signed energetic contracts they've never read. Agreements like, I must earn peace through exhaustion, or being seen comes at a cost, or if I receive too much, I will lose myself. These aren't logical beliefs. They're emotional impressions that became internal permissions, silent invitations the law has no choice but to honor. But what was agreed to can be revised. Mental consent is not final. The moment you recognize that you've been living under a pattern that no longer serves, you're free to withdraw that agreement. The pattern begins to dissolve, not because you've fought it, but because it no longer has your signature on it. This is inner authority, the knowing that you get to decide what has access to your energy field. You get to choose what enters your reality, not by blocking, but by no longer consenting to what contradicts your truth. This doesn't mean you become rigid or hypervigilant. It means you become discerning. It means you recognize when something no longer matches your frequency, and you make a clean internal decision to disengage. No protest, no defense, just withdrawal of attention. The moment you stop holding the belief in place, the structure begins to loosen. And here's the deeper truth. Every time you offer a new agreement to creative mind, a higher one, life starts building a new mirror. Slowly at first, then unmistakably. People shift, conversations change, paths appear where there were none. Not because you forced them, but because you stopped sustaining the old pattern. You're not waiting for a miracle. You're aligning with one. And it begins with this clarity. I no longer mentally consent to anything that dishonors my design. When that becomes your inner policy, your outer world begins to match it. Not through struggle, but through coherence. What no longer belongs fades. What's aligned strengthens. The Christ pattern doesn't beg to be expressed. It simply doesn't agree with distortion. And as you match that level of inner precision, your life stops reflecting what's been projected by fear and starts echoing what's been chosen by truth. This is why inner work is never wasted. Every time you revise an assumption, reframe a belief, or withdraw your energy from a story that shrinks you, you clean the mirror. You stop asking the world to change and instead adjust what the world is reflecting. And as the mirror shifts, so does the form. Right use of will directs thought. Your mind is not a wild animal to be tamed, nor a tool to be controlled through force. It is a vehicle of intention, waiting for proper direction. And that direction is provided by your will, not through pressure, but through focus. Charles Haanel taught that will is not about domination, it is about spiritual steering. The will, when properly understood, is the power to choose where you place your attention. And where attention goes, energy flows, and form follows. You're not here to wrestle your thoughts into submission. You're here to guide them, to calmly and repeatedly turn them back toward what's true, what's constructive, what's aligned with the Christ pattern already seated in your nature. This is the law of directed attention. What you repeatedly look toward becomes what you feed, and what you feed inevitably grows. It's not always easy to stay focused. Distraction is everywhere. Inner noise rises the moment you sit still. Old patterns beg for energy. But the will doesn't overcome these things by resisting them. It overcomes by gently but firmly re-choosing. Rechoosing is the essence of power. Each time you bring your attention back to your chosen thought, even after you've wandered, you strengthen the muscle of mastery. You're not seeking to eliminate all mental drift. You're building the capacity to return without drama. That's what the trained will does. It doesn't panic when it slips. It realigns. This form of discipline is quiet, even invisible to others. But it changes everything, because as your capacity to focus deepens, so does your influence over what you experience. The Christ pattern doesn't scatter. It is precise, clear, unwavering. And when your will is trained to direct thought toward that frequency, the outer begins to reorganize in response. This is not mental rigidity, it's creative maturity. When you stop entertaining thoughts that contradict your vision, not out of fear, but out of clarity, you begin to experience the benefits of mental stillness. Less noise, less pull toward conflict, more efficiency in how your energy is used. Thought is power. But directed thought is usable power. It becomes constructive, generative, alive with purpose. It moves with you rather than against you. It sharpens your perception. It refines your choices, and it eventually begins to create conditions that reflect its coherence. Right use of will doesn't mean obsessively correcting every thought. It means being awake enough to know where your focus lives and committed enough to place it where it builds, rather than where it depletes. You might notice in the coming days that certain thoughts no longer appeal, not because they disappeared, but because you've stopped reinforcing them with attention. You've started to rewire the connection. That's the will at work, not loudly, but steadily. The point is not perfection. The point is returning on purpose. And the more you return, the more momentum you build. Eventually, the mind begins to follow the will with less resistance. Focus becomes familiar. Peace becomes more natural. Your thoughts begin to serve your vision instead of sabotaging it. That's when manifestation quickens. Not because you did more, but because you used less effort to deliver a stronger signal. You chose to think on purpose. And the law, always obedient, followed your lead. Imagination initiates the constructive pattern. Creation begins not with effort, but with inner seeing. Before anything becomes physical, it must first become familiar. Not to the eyes, but to the imaginative faculty, the spiritual lens through which you project and prepare your reality. Imagination is not fantasy. It is foundational. It is how creative mind receives your request, not by language alone, but by image impressed with emotion. The clearer and more consistent the picture, the more receptive the field becomes. And when that image matches your inner state, construction begins. Haanel emphasized this with unmistakable clarity. Imagination is the mold, the energetic architecture. Whatever you persist in seeing, especially when it evokes feeling, becomes the signal creative mind works with. Not a metaphorical suggestion, but a causative pattern. The pattern doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be clear. Most people use imagination reactively, not creatively. They rehearse fear, replay worst-case scenarios, see themselves under pressure, falling short, being overlooked. And they do this with frequency, emotion, and repetition, exactly the ingredients needed to create. Then they wonder why anxiety feels familiar. But imagination can be reclaimed. It can be redirected toward constructive use. That's not about creating fake images or pretending everything's fine. It's about forming an inner picture that matches your chosen frequency, rather than your inherited story. The Christ pattern uses imagination not as escape, but as initiation. It sees what is true before it's visible. It holds that image long enough for reality to catch up. And it does this without strain, because it knows, once the field receives a coherent vision, it responds. You don't imagine to trick yourself, you imagine to instruct. The picture is not wishful, it's architectural. It tells your subconscious, this is who we are now. And when the subconscious accepts it, behavior changes. Tone changes. Timing aligns. Choices become natural, not forced. Even when the world doesn't reflect your image yet, Your system starts adapting. You begin responding from the image, not just toward it. And that response conditions the field to mirror the new pattern. This is the moment when people say, something shifted. Not because the external changed first, but because the image finally settled. It rooted itself, it stopped competing with contradiction, and began transmitting with stability. Imagination is how you preview the unseen, and the longer you hold the preview, the more inevitable the experience becomes. Let it be simple. Choose the inner picture that aligns with your highest truth. Not a fantasy of escape, but a vision of expansion. The version of you already aligned with clarity, order, grace, purpose. Then allow yourself to feel it, not in desperation, but in familiarity. Return to that image not as an effort, but as an agreement. The more familiar it becomes inside, the faster it becomes familiar outside. You are not imagining to make something happen. You are imagining because it is happening, and you're letting your system catch up. This is how the constructive pattern takes form, not instantly, but inevitably. Subconscious acceptance determines manifestation speed. The subconscious mind is not a passive recorder. It's a powerful builder, operating around the clock. Once it accepts an idea as true, it will seek to express that idea through your body, your environment, your relationships, and your conditions. It doesn't question. It doesn't argue. It constructs. This is the law of subconscious impression. Whatever idea is deeply felt and frequently repeated will be taken as instruction. And once the instruction is accepted, it will override previous programming. It becomes the new operational code for how life is experienced. The subconscious doesn't respond to surface affirmations. It responds to what's emotionalized and believed. You could repeat, "I am worthy" 100 times, but if your underlying tone says otherwise, the system will follow the deeper signal. Haanel warned us not to underestimate the precision of this process. You are not rewarded for good intentions. You are met by what you have allowed to settle as normal within. The world does not reflect your wishes. It reflects your accepted standard. That's not a condemnation. It's your key to freedom. You do not need to perfect your past or undo every misstep. You simply need to plant the new seed, nurture it through consistency, and protect it from contradiction. This is how reprogramming begins, not all at once, but through daily agreement with truth. The subconscious is always listening, always recording, always responding to repetition, especially when charged with feeling. The more often you offer a new image, a new thought, a new tone, and the more belief you bring to it, the more quickly it is accepted. It's not about force. It's about familiarity. The subconscious accepts what is repeated with confidence, not what is begged for in desperation. So the task is to make truth feel normal, to internalize a state of being so completely that the system says, "Yes, this is who I am now." That's when change gets fast, because the subconscious runs 95% of your behavior, your energy, your patterns. When it's aligned with your conscious desire, movement becomes swift. There's no more conflict, no more delay. Thought, feeling, and action all begin to point in the same direction. You'll notice it first in the small things: how you speak, how you respond, how you breathe. You'll begin catching yourself acting from the new pattern without effort. That's not coincidence. That's internal acceptance doing its work. Then outer conditions begin shifting to match, not because you forced them, but because you finally stopped sending mixed signals. The inner contract changed, the dominant tone shifted, and the law responded not kindly, not harshly, but mechanically as it always does. This is where the Christ pattern integrates with ease. It does not beg the subconscious to change. It feeds it steady truth until the old code becomes irrelevant. It doesn't panic when the old reaction arises. It calmly returns to the new baseline again and again until the old habit has nothing left to stand on. You are not at the mercy of the subconscious. You are the retrainer of it. And every time you return to the chosen idea with belief and presence, you deepen the impression. Eventually, the subconscious accepts it as reality, and when that happens, form follows swiftly. So what are you impressing today? Let it be something you want multiplied. Let it be something your life can build upon. Because the moment the system accepts it, it will do exactly that. Emotion fuels the form into motion. Without feeling, thought has no fire. It floats without impact, drifts without roots. But the moment emotion is engaged, especially with intention, thought moves from abstract to active. It gains weight. It begins to shape energy into form with speed and certainty. This is the law of emotionalized thought. It tells us that emotion is not just a reaction, it is a charge, a voltage that powers your thought into the creative system. Without emotion, a thought is weak. With aligned emotion, it becomes magnetic. Charles Haanel called emotion the vital force behind manifestation, not just a passive experience, but a creative agent that breathes life into mental patterns. But not all emotion creates. Only emotion that matches your desired form, clarity, gratitude, calm certainty, accelerates creation. Emotion that contradicts the chosen thought muddies the signal. It doesn't slow the law, but it splits your frequency. This is why people often feel stuck. Their thought affirms one thing, while their emotion energizes its opposite. They speak abundance, but carry anxiety. They visualize love, but feel unworthy. The result? Interference, delay, confused results. You cannot outthink your dominant emotional state. The law listens to the totality of your vibration, not just the words you say with your mouth. So the real work becomes, harmonize the thought with the feeling. If you cannot yet feel gratitude for what hasn't arrived, feel gratitude for the power to choose again. If joy feels far, reach for calm. If belief feels shaky, breathe into neutrality until confidence grows. This is how emotional alignment begins, not by pretending, but by honoring the next available emotion that supports coherence, one that strengthens, not weakens, one that gives your thought a platform to land on. And here's the power. Once you begin to feel from the vision, not just think toward it, the law engages more fully. Creation becomes quicker, not because you did more, but because you felt from truth with less resistance. The Christ pattern within you does not suppress emotion, it directs it. It recognizes emotion as sacred fuel and channels it through faith, conviction, and clarity. This is why imagination alone isn't enough. It must be energized with feeling. A mental picture without emotion is static. But when infused with real feeling, when it becomes something you can taste, sense, trust, it begins to activate the field, not in some mystical way, but in a systemized, reproducible process. So ask yourself, what emotions are energizing your most frequent thoughts? If the emotion drains your signal, it's time to adjust, not forcefully, but faithfully. You don't need to feel perfectly confident every second. You only need to make feeling alignment your priority more often than not. Eventually, your system learns the new emotional home. Gratitude becomes natural. Calm becomes normal. Certainty becomes your baseline, not because the outer changed first, but because your field was trained to hold that tone. And once it does, results begin showing up, not as a reward, but as a match. Emotion brings thought to life. Let it power what's true. Faith fixes thought into certainty, not blind belief, not wishful thinking, but spiritual confidence rooted in the understanding that the law must respond to aligned thought, that creative mind must reflect what you have consistently impressed upon it. Charles Haanel didn't speak of faith as religious dogma. He framed it as a mental attitude of completeness, a state where you know, not merely hope, that the thing you've impressed upon the subconscious must express itself in form, by law. Faith is what seals the thought. It locks it into energetic instruction. Without faith, thought remains an open file, easily overwritten, interrupted, contradicted by fear, doubt, or external conditions. But when you think with faith, you close the file. You finalize the instruction. You give the law no mixed signals to interpret. Faith simplifies creation. It reduces noise. It eliminates debate. You've likely noticed this. The moment you stop checking for signs, the moment you stop wondering if it's working, that's when results accelerate. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you've entered certainty. You've shifted your tone from requesting to knowing. This knowing is the key to speed. The law doesn't delay based on worthiness. It doesn't withhold based on effort. It mirrors the strength and consistency of your signal, and faith is what sustains that signal without decay. Faith is also quiet. It doesn't need external validation. It doesn't broadcast. It anchors. You can walk in faith without ever announcing it. The field knows. Your system knows. The energy stabilizes, and reality begins to follow. When you think with faith, you don't beg the law to respond. You assume it already has. And from that assumption, you live differently. You speak differently. You make decisions that only someone in alignment would make. That's when you become magnetic, not just to outcomes, but to clarity. Faith is not emotional hype. It is the absence of interference. It's what remains when the internal war ends and your energy becomes unified. The Christ pattern operates entirely from this place. It does not waver between possibilities. It knows what it is here to express. And when you step into agreement with that energy, when your thoughts no longer contradict your design, your life begins to reflect that unity. You may not feel confident every day. That's human. But you can choose to stand in faith even when emotion fluctuates. You can re-enter the vibration of certainty by remembering the law works through you, not outside of you. It responds to pattern, not pleading. So pause for a moment right now. Feel the tone of knowing. What happens when you no longer need proof? What emerges when you trust that your thought has already taken root? Faith isn't passive. It is the most powerful form of causation. When you hold it, nothing can delay what you've chosen, because you're no longer asking, you are receiving. Expression completes the creative cycle. Thought initiates. Feeling energizes. Faith stabilizes. But expression, living from the idea, acting in alignment, is what seals it into form. Without expression, the process remains theoretical. It never touches the world. It never echoes outward. Expression doesn't mean shouting your beliefs or forcing action. It means embodying your chosen thought with enough consistency that your behavior begins to reflect it naturally. That reflection becomes evidence to the subconscious, and the subconscious, seeing that your actions match the new pattern, reinforces it. This is the law of action in harmony with thought. It doesn't ask you to hustle. It asks you to be congruent. It asks you to let your choices echo your intention, not to prove, but to affirm. Charles Haanel wrote that we only truly believe what we act upon. This is not a guilt-laden standard. It's a call to integration. When you take even the smallest step from the new identity, you begin collapsing the gap between vision and reality. You don't have to know the whole path, but you must walk in alignment with what you already know. This is how creative mind completes the loop. Your thought, once imagined and accepted, now gains traction through action. The form starts stabilizing, not from outside to inside, but from inside out. You act not to cause belief, but because belief already lives in you. When you speak with clarity, invest with calm, create with vision, or say no with integrity, you reinforce the tone of truth, and life responds with confirmation, momentum, and visibility. Expression also creates a field. Others begin to feel it. Conditions begin to organize around it. The energy becomes recognizable, and opportunities emerge, not because you chased them, but because you matched their frequency first. The Christ pattern does not wait to be perfect. It moves, it speaks, it creates, it blesses, not out of pressure, but out of fullness. When that same current flows through you, you no longer perform alignment, you embody it. This is where grace accelerates. When expression becomes natural, reality stops lagging. Conditions unfold more quickly. The outer echoes the inner without static. Why? Because your entire system is now unified, thought, feeling, faith, and form acting as one. This is the goal of every teaching you've ever absorbed. Not more knowledge, but deeper embodiment. Not louder prayer, but clearer presence. Not desperate rituals, but deliberate expression. What you express, you impress more deeply. What you live, you anchor into permanence. Expression is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of integration. And once you integrate, you become the pattern. Not a seeker of truth, not a student of power, but a living conduit of both. Now we pause, not to disengage, but to settle. You've heard the words, you've felt the resonance. You've remembered that you are not merely the observer of power, you are its active channel. A creative intelligence lives in you, and through you, and as you. And now that truth has been stirred. Let this wisdom settle in your bones. Let it root deeper than theory. Let it become something you breathe, not something you chase. Because everything you've heard today is already yours. It isn't new, it's remembered. The Christ pattern within you has never been dormant. It has only waited for your attention, your agreement, your activation. And now you've begun. You are safe to receive now, safe to release what no longer matches your frequency, safe to embrace thoughts that feel too big, too good, too free, because those are the ones that match your original design. The law is not testing you. It is reflecting you. Nothing more needs to be forced, only chosen. So, choose now. Choose to hold your clarity more often than your doubt. Choose to feel from the reality that belongs to you, not someday, but now. Choose to speak, act, think, and create as one who knows, I am the Word made flesh. Because you are. You always have been. And now, you're simply living as though it were true.